Ken McCarthy, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
You've also written about what's going on in Gaza.
Absolutely.
And of course, linked to that is the Zionist project and JFK, which is an absolutely fascinating link.
Well, it's propaganda is always the first horse that arrives, in the battle.
There's the segue. Propaganda.
Right? And so forever, Arabs, they always call them Arabs. It's like they don't distinguish. They speak Arabic. That doesn't mean they're Arabs. They could be Egyptian. They could be Moroccan. Moroccan's not an Egyptian. And an Egyptian's not an Algerian. And a Palestinian, it's like crazy. But that's the first level of propaganda. Oh, they're all Arabs, and they're all, and this has been going back for hundreds of years. They're all, they're unreliable. They're crafty. They're shifty. They're violent. There's all this madness, right? So that's the drumbeat that's been going on not for decades, but for centuries, right? And then, of course, I don't know how it is in South Africa, but in the United States, we're just completely. Our media is completely, and our politicians are completely in bed in the Zionist project. I think is a good way to describe it. They've done a very good job of corrupting our politicians. They either pay them off or they blackmail them. They do a very good job of controlling the news media. So here we have in broad daylight genocide. That goes. It just gets when you think it can't be any more horrific, they do something even more unbelievable. So what I did, and I saw that coming a mile away. And so what I did was, when South Africa, the great Republic of South Africa, filed a claim against Israel in the World Court, and they did it so fast. I said, all right, we all need a copy. We need a physical copy of this claim with all the footnotes, and we need to make sure we need to save all the evidence online because sometimes websites go down. So what we did was we put the South African complaint, the whole thing, with some introductory essays and so on, in book form. And then we backed up every single website, because that's the one thing I've learned in my years as a web journalist is that websites disappear. Websites with important information tend to disappear. So we had that book out even before the trial started. The day that I heard there was a formal complaint, we were immediately, making that book. So that was round one. Round two, because Americans are very fond of JFK, is we published a book called JFK Anti-Imperialist. And we wanted to make the point that this beloved president of ours was against imperialism.
But but he was one of the very few U.S. presidents that wasn't completely bought by the Zionist project.
Well, you know why? His father. A lot of people aren't aware of this because there's mythology on the Kennedy side too. His father was at one point the fifth richest man in America. So his father had Bill Gates, Elon Musk type wealth. His father was also very deeply embedded in the Democratic Party. He had thought about running for president himself. So he was a wheeler and dealer, and he had already wired the country for himself to be president. It didn't work out for various reasons. And then the third element that Joseph Kennedy had, because there would have never been a JFK or an RFK we would never have known these guys existed had it not been for their dad. Okay, they were bright men, they were courageous men, they were good men, but without the juice from their dad, they would one guy, JFK wanted to be a journalist, RFK wanted to be an attorney. They didn't have these grand things. So the third thing that the father had, which nobody ever talks about, is that he is the man, among many financial things that he did, he is the man that modernized Hollywood as an industry. When he went out to Hollywood, it was this, on a tripod, a guy with a thing, two actors, and then sound came in. And that took what was a very inexpensive cottage industry and made everything super expensive. Well, you need a good financier if you're going to get engaged in super expensive enterprises. Joseph Kennedy was the financial genius that managed the financial transformation of Hollywood from this very primitive cottage industry to this really big industrial thing. So the reason I bring this up is he knew all about publicity, glamour, taking pictures from the right angles. So if you look at the photographs of the Kennedys, they always look like gods. They're always, everything's lit. They're with their little kids. They're on a sailboat. They're playing touch football. That wasn't an accident, right? So you had one of the richest men in America who was wired into the Democratic Party, who knew how to position. And he couldn't get in, so he wanted his sons to get in. So to answer your point, they owed nothing to anybody. Their dad put them in that position. They didn't have to go around on bended knee and say, oh, we need a little money for this campaign. No, they didn't have that problem at all. So they were the only fully independent, maybe Roosevelt to a degree. I mean, no one's ever fully independent, but they were very independent. And the third book that I just want to talk a little about anti-imperialism. There used to be an anti-imperialism stream in American culture. It was active in the 19th century. Our famous writer Mark Twain was an anti-imperialist. Andrew Carnegie, believe it or not, the great steel magnate, was an anti-imperialist. Grover Cleveland, a former president, was an anti-imperialist. Well, after World War I, they just beat down anybody that wanted to talk about anti-imperialism. It just disappeared. That whole movement just disappeared. So John F. Kennedy was actually an anti-imperialist in the White House. And so what I did in that book was I have a collection of his speeches. He gave a speech on the floor of the Senate saying that the French had to get out of Vietnam and stop, it was a disaster. It was he also, now here's where it really gets interesting. He gave a similar speech that the French had to get out of Algeria. Okay, now think about this. He's a senator from a state, a pretty conservative state in those days. We were in the middle of the Cold War. There was no political benefit to be had by speaking on behalf of the Algerian people. None. In fact, it cost him. But he believed in it super strongly. And now here's something, we all know, everybody knows everything about JFK except the stuff that matters, which is propaganda, right? When France finally pulled out after 150 years, and they killed nearly 1/3 of the population of Algeria over 150 years. I mean, it was as brutal as it could be. They elected their president, and what did JFK do? He invited that man in the White House. And usually you see these pictures, like there's a chair and here and a chair over there, and they're sitting there and shaking hands. No. He took over the entire back yard of the White House, the Rose Garden. He had color guards from all the 5 militaries. And it wasn't 3 guys with a flag. It was 20 guys deep from each military. He had the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had the Vice President. He had everybody in the government that he could find that day come out to honor this man from Algeria and an Arab, right? Because they speak Arabic in Algeria. Now, that was, and I have never seen, and I ask, and by the way, everybody can find this. Just go Algeria, President JFK, YouTube. You can watch the reception. I have never seen an American president give a reception like that to any human being. What was Kennedy saying? And he said, we believe in freedom. We're going to compete, and we're going to compete hard, but we're not going to put our feet on, our heel on your neck while we're doing it. And we're going to treat you like brothers. That's what he wanted to do. Now, interestingly enough, who was sending mercenaries to Algeria to help the French kill Algerians? Our friends. South Africa, and their friends, Israel. And for young people that don't know this, the very last countries to support apartheid were Israel and the United States. So,
and the Crown, actually. And
of course, yeah. I mean, they're always they just can't let it go. They just can't let it go. So that gives, I think, some insight into where Kennedy's head was at, and he was fighting.
He also didn't like the CIA.
He didn't like the CIA at all, and his father didn't like the CIA. And President Truman, who approved of the CIA being formed, didn't like the CIA. In fact, he wrote an editorial after Kennedy was killed, making some veiled commentary. That editorial was pulled because they used to have issues, like the first issue would come out in the morning, and then that only ran once. It was never seen again. But yeah, a lot of people were concerned about the CIA. Now, I discovered, much to my surprise, there's a wonderful journalist called Richard Medhurst, who you may have heard of. In fact, people haven't. He's really good, and he's the guy that broke the story that there was some crazy plan to drop 300 atomic bombs in the Sinai Peninsula to build a canal from the Red Sea to roughly Gaza, actually. And I saw that, and I learned it was real. And I thought, and I saw the time frame. And I said, well, President Kennedy would have never gone for that. He wouldn't have gone for that. He was the guy that stopped all above ground atomic testing. So I Googled atomic testing, canal, Sinai, Kennedy, and up came this history that I'd never heard of, which is that in the summer, and this is where it really becomes important. In the summer of 1963, excuse me, is that right? Yeah, summer of 1963. What were the Kennedys doing? A lot of this was classified until relatively recently, but there were all the cables, all the letters, all the telegrams, and it was very clear they were battling with Israel behind the scenes. And they had 2 points they were making to Israel in the summer of 1963. Number one, you may not have an atomic bomb. Okay, you want to do nuclear power, you want to do nuclear research, fine. We need to go to your lab right now, and we need to see what you're doing, because if you're developing an atomic weapon, you and I are going to have big problems. And Kennedy was polite, he was cordial, but he was emphatic on that point. Your support, you're putting the support of your country, from our country, at risk if you do not allow us to see your nuclear facility. Now they kept postponing and putting it off, and the weather's not right, and it's high holiday. I mean, all this nonsense. And now his brother, who is Attorney General, unprecedented in American history to have two brothers at that level. His brother was on the Zionists about they're not filing as foreign lobbyists. Okay. In our country, you're allowed to lobby for anybody you want. But if you're lobbying for a foreign country, you have to register with the State Department. And believe it or not, anytime you have a meeting or a publication or anything with more than 3 people, and you're talking on behalf of that country, you have to report that meeting and the content of that meeting or speech or conference to the State Department. It's a very strict rule. Every country follows it, even the UK. There's only one country that doesn't follow it to this day, and that's Israel. And so they were given a free pass to propagandize without limit, so that's that, right? So I'm thinking, let's see, summer of 63, the Kennedys are fighting the Zionist project. Fall of 63, Kennedy gets a bullet in the back of the head. I wonder if there's any other connections between the Zionist project and Kennedy. So I start digging. Most people know that it was not a lone gunman who just had a grievance and got up in a building and shot Kennedy. A lot of people are willing to say that the CIA and the mob, organized crime, were somehow involved, right? I mean, a lot of people go there, but they're very vague, and they always say, it was rogue elements, right? Which is sort of like rogue elephants, right? But rogue elements of the CIA. They never name them, right? And then when they mention the mob, they always mention the Italian guys. Trafficante, here's the reality. Let's go to the mob side. There was a mobster named Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky literally put the organized and organized crime. All right, we hear of organized crime. How did that start? Meyer Lansky and his buddy Lucky Luciano. They were bootleggers, and there was a lot of violence, hijacking people's beer trucks and all kinds of craziness going on. And Meyer Lansky called a meeting of all the gangsters and said, look, guys, there's plenty of money for everybody. Stop messing up here. So you get Cleveland, you get Buffalo, you get this, you get that. Don't cross each other's lines, and we're going to all make a whole lot more money. So then they established a thing called the commission, so that if anything important had to happen that affected all of organized crime, they would all get together physically and plan it out. Right? To enforce this commission, Meyer Lansky and friends created a thing called Murder Incorporated. okay, which a lot of people have heard of from the movies, and you kind of think of it as like three guys in Brooklyn, and they killed some people occasionally. No, Murder Incorporated was a nationwide network of hitmen, and another word for hitmen is really assassin. It's the same job. And if you think of what a hitman has to do, a hitman has to surveil. You have to know where your target is going. What's his routine? You have to know what his security is. You have to have a plan for when he's going to be vulnerable. You have to have a plan to commit the crime and get away. You have to have a plan to commit the crime and get away and confuse the investigation and think it's somebody else. This is all what a hitman does. So Meyer Lansky controlled 100 plus professional hitmen. Okay. He also was a Zionist. He ran guns to Israel when it was illegal to run guns to Israel. He helped Israel get nuclear material. So he was the man who was one of the key, and he was the money launderer, right? Very easy to commit a crime, hard to get away with the crime, hard to get away with hiding the money. That's why Al Capone, the great gangster, went to jail. Not because he did all these crimes, but because he didn't file his taxes correctly. So the whole of organized crime looked to this one guy, because they're running around, shooting people, robbing banks, stealing drugs, running prostitutes, all this crazy stuff, piling up the money. Then they would go to Meyer, and Meyer would launder it. And he used a bank. He used a lot of methods. He used casinos. He actually used laundromats. But he used a bank in Switzerland owned by Zionist elements. Okay. So when they say the mob was involved in killing Kennedy, Meyer Lansky had to be involved, but they never mention his name. You can read 100 books. You can go to every assassination conference. They'll always talk about the Italians. They'll never talk about Meyer Lansky. Now, when we go to the CIA, it gets even worse. You have the director of the CIA, right? He's the boss. And have you heard that, Allen Dulles was somehow involved in the assassination? That it's sort of for people that are into the assassination. They'll say, that he was mad at Kennedy. He was the director for a while. They never talk about this other fellow. This guy was director of counterintelligence, okay? And I'll explain what counterintelligence is in a second. This guy was counterintelligence head for 5 different directors of the CIA. He got his job in the mid-50s. He didn't leave till the mid-70s. So CIA directors came and went. This guy always was in position. Counterintelligence, to sum it up simply, is the guy that keeps the secrets for the CIA. He's the guy that makes sure that covert operations are designed to be covert and that they stay covert. That's what counterintelligence is, to oversimplify it. And he had the same job for over 20 years. Guess what? He was one of the founders of the Mossad. He helped the Mossad get created. Because, when you start a new intelligence agency, you don't know what you're doing. So you go to your big brother. The Americans went to the British and the Israelis went to the CIA. So he was one of the founders of the Mossad. Bizarrely, while being head of counterintelligence, he was also head of the Israeli desk. Now, the way the desk works in the CIA is, if I'm the head of the Brazil desk, every bit of news that comes to the CIA gets filtered to this Brazil desk, and we collect it all. And then anybody in the government that wants to know what's going on in Brazil, we distribute it to them. So this guy, in addition to being head of counterintelligence, a founder of the Mossad, was also running the Israeli desk, which is unprecedented in the history of the CIA. There are not one, but 2 memorials to him in Israel, and the Israelis considered him the most important Zionist in America. And his name was James Jesus Angleton. And again, you can read many, 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 many assassination books. If they mention him at all, they mention him in passing. And if so the 2 guys from the CIA side and the organized crime side who had the most power and the most ability to carry out this assassination and cover it up happened to be Zionists.
It's always like that.
It's crazy. But what's really weird is, I'm telling you, you can read every assassination book. They'll never mention this. So who's controlling the assassination research community? Can you get your book published by a major publisher if you mention this? No. Can you speak at a big assassination conference and get paid and sell your books in the back of the room? No. So the propagandizing goes really, really deep. How could we not know that our president, our beloved president, was fighting Israel the summer before he got murdered? How can that not be common knowledge? But it's not.
Let me ask you a question, Ken. Is America a vassal state of Israel, or is Israel a vassal state of America?
It's a good question. And it's like, let's say you're a gangster, right? And you don't personally want to dirty your hands. You don't want to go down to this particular bad side of town and run things, So you find some promising gangsters and you put them in charge. So I think that's what Israel is ultimately. If we go back to, I always forget the name of this guy, the famous banking family, the big ones in England, and they're the ones that actually financed the movement of Zionists to Israel in the first place. I'll think of their name, but people just don't know how rich is, and I'll give you an example of how rich is. This same family created, as among many projects, they just had like you and I might open a restaurant together, and we'll, raise the money and we'll rent a place, we'll hire chefs, we'll get food. That keeps us busy. These guys have so much money and so much resources. They like terraform the globe. For example, one of their agents, Rothschild. The Rothschilds wrote the checks for the original Zionists to go to Israel or to Palestine. Why did they do that? Well, one, there was the canal that went through Egypt, that they didn't like the fact that, they knew the canal is so important. It's the literal link between East and West. And even though we're in a digital world now, things are moved by ship. The things we eat, the things we wear, the things we drive, the things that build our house, it's moved by ship. So that canal is super important. So the Rothschilds clearly wanted to have their gangsters in place. They also wanted to be able to lend money. The population in Palestine was self-sufficient economically. And this is a theme. Iraq was self-sufficient economically. The Palestinians were self-sufficient economically. The Libyans were self-sufficient economically. That's not helpful. The Russians are self-sufficient economically. Wall Street does not have its claws in those countries. Iran is self-sufficient economically, right? And so if you're a mega banker, and it's not necessarily the Rothschilds, they were the ones that got the ball rolling. It's this vast complex. When you're a banker, you're a lot like a loan shark. You know what a loan shark does? A loan shark lends money. A guy's gambling, he loses money. The loan shark lends him money, and he has to pay him 1% a week. Banking is not much different. You've got this money, you want to put it to work. So you look around the globe. And if you're on the Rothschild level, you're looking around the globe going, I got billions of dollars here. Like I don't have to worry about that problem. I don't have that problem. But they have a problem of like, how do I put my money to work? So in terms of the Middle East, they thought, well, let's put some, blue-eyed, blonde-haired European guys smack dab in the middle of this place that we want to take over ultimately. So that's how the original Zionists got there. Another example that of this, which I think is enlightening, is when I was in Guatemala, and I was talking to a human rights attorney. We were talking about all kinds of things, and we happened to be in the center of the original center of the coffee industry in Guatemala. And he says, "Oh yeah, all this was built by the Rothschilds. One of their agents discovered that you could grow coffee here very well, and there was a lot of underused land. And so the Rothschilds came in and they brought the trees, they brought the experts, they taught the big landowners how to grow coffee, they built the warehouses, they built the trains, they built the ports. They invested all this money into creating the coffee industry in Guatemala. So that's the level at which the Rothschilds work, or the big banks work. Let's call them the big banks. So that's who put the Zionists in Palestine originally. And so I think, is Israel running the world? No. Israel's been given a free rein, or the Zionists have been given a free run to do all kinds of crazy stuff because we who are the royal we see them as useful in a part of the world that we ultimately want to take over. Because clearly the U.S. is on board with everything the Zionist project's doing. I mean, it's so obvious. Right? If we stop sending weapons tomorrow, the genocide would be over because they're running out of bombs. They can't make enough bombs. So it's the U.S. But the question is, who runs the U.S. is my big question is. And it might go back to who runs the UK, and there might be, and I think what it is huge capital is looking at the world and saying, look, I don't like these guys that are self-sufficient. We need them to be borrowing money from us. Do you know the book, The Economic Hitman? Does that ring a bell?
I interviewed him.
Well, that's the deal. It's like, well, gee, you guys are feeding yourselves, and you could use maybe some science and that we have and some technology we have, but you're pretty self-sufficient. That's not good. We can't make money if you're self-sufficient. So let's put in a big dam. It's going to cost $10 trillion, and we'll front the money, and you got to pay us back. Of course, you never can. So we've got our hooks in you forever. So I think it's that mentality that runs the U.S., that runs the UK, that enables Israel to exist. That's my take.
There is so much to talk about, Ken, and you've written a lot and you've covered a lot of territory. And I would love to chat more, but let's come in for a landing. Yeah. How can I follow your work and get your books?
No publisher will publish my books, and as I found out when I was helping Robert F. Kennedy Jr. get his book distributed, which was The Real Anthony Fauci. Bookstores won't so-called independent bookstores didn't carry that book, wouldn't carry it, wouldn't even take orders for it. So anyway, I have to use Amazon. I also have Lulu. But if you go, I should know this better. I think if you go to brasscheckbooks.com, all my books are there. And because otherwise I have independent websites like I have jfkantiwar.com. And those are not only book sale sites. We have lots of material, videos, interviews, all kinds of, so people can go very deep into the subjects, whether they buy the book or not. I'm publishing books because books are not easily disappeared. They're in your hand. They can't delete them. They can't block them on social media. You can hand a book to somebody. So that's why I'm in the book business now.
On that note, Ken McCarthy, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.